I think Star Wars is becoming culturally irrelevant, which is crazy that it could happen to one of the biggest franchises, if not the biggest franchise ever. There's plenty of reasons why this is happening. They've been talked about for the last decade pretty steadily. From the bad writing, to the constant shitting on the fans, to the simple fact that the old fans are either dying off, becoming apathetic, or simply losing interest for other reasons in life, and they're not being replaced by a younger generation. Star Wars is on the way to being culturally irrelevant, which is pretty crazy when you think about the fact that we had a president say, "May the Force be with you," in the 80s. And one of the reasons I think this is actually happening, that I don't think it's talked about enough, is the move from movies to Disney+. This combined with the horrendous financial mismanagement. Just to go ahead and sum up what I'm going to say in my video, the long and short of it is that movies have been steadily selling less tickets over time, and just the move from theaters to Disney+ has seriously limited the capacity of tickets sold. Just a quick summation of the point, Solo is the worst live-action Star Wars movie, sold about 42 million tickets, and The Mandalorian, which has been far and away their best and most consistent show ratings-wise, is limited to about 26 to 30 million people, roughly. All the streaming numbers are approximate. I'll explain how I got there later and how everyone else calculates them. But that's kind of the long and short of this video, is that just the move from the theater to Disney+ has crippled the amount of people that have access to Star Wars and just completely kneecapped it as far as being culturally relevant is concerned. So the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about the financials and just how I got all these numbers so you understand the methods that I'm using and you can see where the numbers are coming from and I'm not just throwing shit at the wall. And the reason we have to talk about numbers is because if it doesn't make money, they can't keep making shows, obviously. And the likelihood of a low-budget Star Wars thing becoming a cultural phenomenon is much lower than a big-budget one, just by the nature of it. So Forbes came out with this article about a year ago, where what they do is they look at the tax statements that Disney has to submit each year, and this is where you get the actual production budgets. So you can see these are the net cost of each Star Wars movie after they get their tax rebates. So this is what they actually spent. So The Force Awakens was almost $500 million. Rogue One, $230 million. Last Jedi, $300. Solo, $271. Rise of Skywalker, over $400. And then Andor, $200, but we don't have a direct monetization for that one, since it's a streaming one, not a movie. Something that I want to touch on just briefly is that that cost doesn't even include marketing, which this article is from a decade ago, and it says that $200 million is becoming the new standard for big budget movies. And what it goes on to say is essentially that they're averaging about $100 million for domestic marketing and $100 million for international. When you talk about the box office, just roughly, domestically, the movie studio gets about 50 to 60% of a cut of the box office. Internationally, it ranges from like 25 up to 40-ish. So most people just divide the box office in half and assume that that's what the movie actually gets. So if you have a $200 million movie, you spend $50 million on marketing, you need roughly $500 million to break even. What I did was take the budget, a lot of that was from just Box Office Mojo, or if I could find an article with a more specific number, I took it. And then I estimated the marketing budgets. I tried to be fair. So you can see here, I did $200 million for Force Awakens, $150 for Last Jedi, and $150 for Rise of Skywalker. And Rogue One and Solo, I did $100 million because they weren't quite as big budget, but they were still pretty big budget. And then you can see I divided the domestic box office by domestic ticket cost, international box office by international ticket cost, and that's how I got the number of tickets sold. So obviously A New Hope is in its own stratosphere. There's a reason Star Wars is still famous. 350 million tickets sold. You get more stability from that point on. So you get Empire 187, Return of the Jedi 140 something, Phantom Menace you jump back up to 218, Attack of the Clones down to 120, but Revenge of the Sith back up to 140. And then Force Awakens, massive start, 240 million tickets sold, roughly. Rogue One, 120, not bad. Last Jedi dropped quite a bit to 148, and then Rise of Skywalker plummeted to 119. I have the Clone Wars cartoon here, it's just 10 million, but I'm not going to include that because it's not really fair. And also it's super low budget. But you can see by the end, they're losing money. That's what these red numbers are. So Solo lost a lot of money. Rise of Skywalker, about broke even, but you don't spend $500 million to break even. And something else to consider is that when you are not making money in your movies, you're not getting views on your shows or your movies, you're not just losing $9 a ticket or $5 a ticket. You're losing potential toy sales, potential merchandise sales, potential viewers for future movies and shows. So there's a lot that you're losing that's not just those specific dollars. And this whole article, it's pretty interesting. I'm not going to go really into it, but it talks about how George Lucas became as wealthy as he did, and it was because he wanted a cut of the merchandise and toys. And that's what made him obscenely rich. So the reason I bring all that up is to talk about the viewership that they're getting on Disney Plus. So even if you go back to cable, you look at like the cartoon shows, a couple million viewers to start, they finish in the 100,000s usually. It's fine for kids stuff. It's not going to dominate the culture like a modern day Game of Thrones. And the reason that I'm doing it myself, instead of just looking up numbers, the way that they calculate it, especially in the media sphere, is the most optimal for the corporations, which I'm going to calculate it that way too, but I want that pointed out. And then on top of that, they're also just dishonest, so I don't want to use their numbers. Here's an example of just a recent one. This was after the first 2 episodes of Acolyte came out. They came out on the same day. And they're pumping up the show, Acolyte, up to 11.1 million views on Disney Plus after 5 days. So you'll see a tactic that Disney has done where they keep shifting their shows earlier in the week so they have more days for people to watch. And this article, it says 11.1 views, not viewers, not households. And there's 2 episodes out. So views might just be 5 million people watched episodes 1 and 2. There's no way to know because all the streaming stuff is just black boxes. But the way that this guy calculates it is the way that I'm going to calculate it. And he lays it out very nicely here. You can see he even puts people in quotes because all you do is you divide the minutes watched by the runtime and you essentially assume that every person watched 100% of the show and they only watched that episode for that week. And you can see here he's done it for the whole season. So he just summed up the minutes watched, divided it by the runtime. You got your average number of viewers. Now, I think that's a really convenient way to do it. It doesn't include rewatches. It doesn't include people who start the show and then stop. It doesn't include, for example, if I watch every episode as it comes out and I'm like, man, I want to rewatch them all before the finale, there's no way to know that. So these are the absolute best numbers for them. And the reason I want to use the absolute best numbers is to really emphasize the point of how limited the audience is just by being on Disney Plus. Oh yeah, they also didn't include the credits in their runtimes. And it's not a massive deal, but it's just one of those little things to skew it a little bit higher. Because obviously if you divide your runtime by 45 minutes, it's going to be less viewers than if you divide it by 40 minutes. So that's why they're doing it. And then another metric that we have that I actually like is Samba TV. So Samba is its own thing. It's a little bit newer, but Samba just does households watched. So even though it's not reflective of the total number of viewers, I like that you can see at least the trend. So you can see the difference here in the numbers. You can see how massive this drop-off is. Mando is the peak at 25 million-ish to 30 million-ish at the end of season 2. Book of Boba Fett didn't do shit. Kenobi did okay, 16 million-ish. Andor actually grew a lot as the season went, so that probably has a pretty sizable audience. Ahsoka was about the same as Andor, and then Acolyte was about half of both of those because it was a steaming pile of dog shit. And I think you really have to wonder, if these had all been movies, as they were intended to be originally, like Kenobi for sure, Boba Fett I wouldn't be surprised, Ahsoka I wouldn't be surprised, Andor was structured like a show. But the other ones, if they had all been movies, even if they had bombed, you have to think that they would have at least gotten as many viewers as Solo, like 40 millions. And Kenobi for sure would have. And on top of all this, something else to consider is we don't know how much money they're making back on these shows. The way they make money, obviously, is subscribers. And they're spending about the same amount on these shows as they are on movies. I mean, you can see Mando, 15 million an episode. Andor, 15 to 25 million an episode. Kenobi, 90 million for 6 episodes. Book of Boba Fett, 15 million an episode. So they're spending massive amounts of money. And where is it going? No one's fucking watching. To be fair, you don't need the same amount of viewership for a TV show as you do a movie. Like peak Game of Thrones was like 20 million, but that was on HBO exclusively, and it lasted for a decade. These shows maybe are getting a view a week, and then no one's talking about them. They've all just completely disappeared from everyone's memory. So I just wanted to talk about this and kind of look at the numbers, and mainly because it makes me sad to see Star Wars just slowly dying and becoming irrelevant to the point where they're cutting back on the amount of shows they can make. They're cutting back on the amount of movies they can make. Best case, we're going to get 2 movies over the next 3 years. That'll probably both be bad, both perform bad, and then nothing. And they're just going to keep chugging out crap on Disney Plus, putting out their busted ass game that no one seems to like. Well, I'm going to leave it here for this one. Let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults, which been a lot of those lately. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.